Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Good morning everyone from this beautiful city of Lviv, Ukraine. This is my fifth trip to Ukraine after the full-scale invasion, and it is always a pleasure to come back. So, as you know, with traveling, there's going to be a lot more of these blogs and maybe a little bit less map updates and so on. But in any case, I would like to talk about certain recent events and discussions that has been rocking the so-called pro-Ukrainian side. Specifically, it is with regards to the discussion of what can happen with Russia now claiming that the Baltics are allowing Ukraine to use their airspace, and some people trying to imply that this means that Russia will invade the Baltics. So today I want to kind of go over some of these, maybe not so much the claims, because the claims itself are not the problem. It's more about is it factually dangerous or not to consider them seriously. So let's start with the simple understanding. Does the Baltics provide the airspace for Ukrainian drones? Because we did find some Ukrainian drones inside of the Baltics. And the truth of the matter is that no, it is not the case. Baltics have openly stated that they are not providing the space to Ukraine. More than that, Ukraine themselves stated that they are not utilizing the Baltic space. And if you just look at the map, it just doesn't make sense for Ukraine to utilize the space of the Baltic nations, because it just complicates the drone routes and everything else. The reality is that what's happening is so-called spoofing technology. If you've ever been to Ukraine during the air raid alarm, you know very much what spoofing is. When you have your map open on your phone and you have your GPS open, then suddenly you find yourself in some different country altogether, because the GPS is being spoofed with additional data, getting it to freak out and essentially perceive that you're located in some other country altogether. What Russia is doing basically is they know the GPS paths of some of these Ukrainian drones, and they're dedicatedly spoofing it in a certain way that these drones are getting diverted to fly into the Baltic space. Now, why Baltics are allowing them to fly and not shooting it down is a whole other question. The Latvian government actually resigned specifically because of that, because they did not protect the Latvian skies clearly enough. So, I mean, if it's the Latvians that are launching the drones themselves, why would the Latvian government resign because of that? That doesn't make sense politically whatsoever. No, it's very clearly that this is a deliberate use of Russia by using Ukrainian drones as their weapons. Now, Russians are using these as a political pretext and discuss that they will attack certain bases in Baltics, and these bases are not secret. Everyone knows where these bases are. So let's now talk the escalation pattern, right? Now that Peskov has been stating that Russia is preparing a response, some people are already taking this that Russia will send in the troops. And the first answer, the first question that should anyone be asking, what troops? Let's be very clear, Russia cannot just get troops to appear out of nowhere. Amassing of troops specifically to invade the Baltics that have been reinforced, that have also dug out some fortifications inside of the Baltics and everything, would require certain force. It would require Russia to get the force saturated along the borders with the Baltics. We saw that happen with Ukraine. Like, for good amount of 2021, we saw just Russia amassing forces. There was a whole discussion about this. So it wasn't that the invasion that happened just spontaneously. In the same way, it will not happen in the Baltics, if it would ever happen. That's why all of the claims that Russia is just going to invade with forces, or even worse, Belarus is going to invade with forces, I think it's a bit of nonsense. Now, that doesn't mean that no action can be taken for Russia. That is very clear. And the biggest threat to the Baltics is the hybrid activity with the so-called Little Green Man, aka Crimea, or the second one is basically drone activity. And I mean, from here on out, the discussions are wild. But before that, I want to cut back to the troop invasion, because there is one theory that is still making rounds, which needs to die. And that is the idea that, you know, there is this Suwalki Gap, which is like between Lithuania and Poland. There's this narrow piece of land between Belarus and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. And everyone is looking at the map and says like, oh, it's only like a couple tens of kilometers, so it's super narrow, so Russia can just cut it in one swoop, and then that's it, Baltics are cut out. You need to understand that this has been the main part of defense strategy for decades now. Everyone knows that this is the weak point, and all contingency plans that have been drafted ever since by every military have been focused on specifically what to do with the Suwalki Gap. Thankfully, we have some information already leaked about this, so we know what the course of action is. The course of action is very simple. Kaliningrad just gets taken out. Either it's going to get completely ruined militarily, so there is no military activity there. There is plenty of weapons that are deployed around that exclave, or it just gets temporarily occupied. So whenever there is some kind of action, then the Baltic and NATO forces are going to come in and take over this exclave if anything happens. So the preemptive, specifically a campaign, has already been discussed in droves, and there are concrete plans in there. So this whole discussion about Suwalki Gap just needs to end. It will not happen. But let's come back to the strikes and hybrid warfare. So hybrid warfare, I am a little bit skeptical of. We are not in 2016 anymore. A lot of Baltic special services, like secret police, so to say, have been all working very tirelessly to specifically target any and all insurgency groups. So if Russia is to infiltrate, there are protocols in place within the Baltics to take care of them. And whenever we're talking the infiltration groups, we're talking very, very small numbers. We're talking maybe like 1,000 or something troops. That is like at maybe peak. And even 1,000 would be already quite excessive. Despite the fact that there are people with the pro-Russian narratives on the east side of the Baltics, you need to remember the history of the start of the war in Ukraine in 2014, that there was not a lot of collaborators inside of Crimea and in the east of Ukraine. Russia basically called for the Russian main force to come in because Ukrainians were just completely destroying them, and they didn't have the local population support and didn't have the local population joining in droves, despite the popular narratives. And the same will happen also in the Baltics if there is this incursion. And at that moment, you need to understand that Baltics are specifically prepared for this scenario to work on their own terms. I know that the Baltic countries are small countries, but every single country has enough power to deal with a limited insurgency or hybrid warfare scenario. So that's why I don't feel that the hybrid warfare scenario that is being proposed here is really realistic. And we're going to come back to it because we're going to get in conspiracy theories, and that's going to be like to end on a positive note. But the more dangerous things that can happen is the strikes against the Baltic targets. Whether these strikes will be done by the Russian drones from the Russian territory is one thing, but it can also be done sort of like Operation Spiderweb-like from the internal territory. And that is probably the biggest risks, because right now we saw the response on these hybrid attacks. There has already been arsons and sabotages on the factories inside of Europe. So if suddenly there are drones that are appearing on territory of the Baltics that Russia is claiming are Ukrainian drones, and these drones are striking the NATO facilities all across the Baltics, well, how do we categorize that? I think NATO is still unprepared in their response to treat it as an open aggression. So response to it can be quite, not very good. The good news is that this scenario pretty much leads to nowhere. Like, it doesn't have the political clout. It doesn't achieve the goals of sort of a diminishing the NATO resolve. We already saw sabotages happen all across. So while it can inflict material damage, and it will indeed spark a lot of internal discussions, it is not something that is sort of alliance ending. And when I'm talking NATO alliance, I'm not talking about the on paper NATO alliance, you know, like Turkey, United States. Obviously, that's like kind of like we already passed that. I'm talking about on the NATO base, the coalition of the willing countries to actually fight against Russia, like the Nordic Baltic 8 and potentially Germany and so on. So overall, that scenario I don't feel realistic. And then we get into conspiracy theories, and this is where it gets absolutely wild, because I think I've heard it all and it's hilarious. So point number one, when it says like, oh, if there is strikes against the targets in the Baltics, and then the Baltics try to retaliate against the Russian aggression, then suddenly this is gonna end up with Belarus that now has been facilitated to have nuclear weapons. So they will start threatening nuclear weapons to Baltics to get them to, I don't even know, like, because the person that actually told about these theories stating that's like, yes, if the NATO countries retaliate, then Belarus will be used as this dog with a NATO, with a nuclear, weapons to strike the Baltic countries with nuclear weapons. And I mean, the logic here is absolutely golden. So the goal is to sabotage the NATO countries by striking them with nuclear weapons, so then they essentially get into internal conflict and then dismantle their support for Ukraine that Russia will not use nuclear weapons on, apparently. It's that logic here stands on absolutely no ground. Nuclear weapons gain absolutely nothing for Russia in this scenario. Nuclear weapons are a great deterrent against aggression, but like using them offensively is a very double-edged sword. So unfortunately, there is no play with nuclear weapons here, despite all of the best, weirdest conspiracy theories. And then the second one, talking about the hybrid warfare, the wild scenario is that if the Baltics retaliate against the hybrid warfare, then suddenly Putin will call on its allies, on China, stating, look, the population of Russian countries are oppressed, therefore they will call on Chinese and North Korean forces to come in and invade the Baltics. That is not going to happen. Even the North Koreans that came in to participate in the war in the Russian territory, they had a very limited participation, and they had a lot of issues working with the Russians. So I don't really feel that they're going to be joining anytime soon. So to sum it up, I think that Putin sort of missed his window of opportunity during this first year of Trump, where there was a lot of uncertainty around the NATO alliance. I feel that after Trump has attacked NATO and basically all but dismantled NATO, just in a not in name only, is now made resolve of the specific coalitions more concrete, and close cooperation between the Baltics, Ukrainians, having the proper surveillance. I don't feel that there is any good scenario for Russia to really execute here. I mean, there could be something creative, but we do know that Russia has been lacking with some of the creative manners. And even if they're going to prepare something creative, I want to remind you that intelligence of allies have been reporting on Russian activities and when they're going to start the war in Ukraine, almost to an hour or a date. So let's be very clear, it's not going to be something secret and unknown to the allies. So that's why I don't feel threatened by Russia yet. We should be wary. We should be looking at what Russia does. Putin is stupid enough to do stupid things, but it's not going to happen unexpectedly, and I'm pretty sure there's already contingency plans in order. In all case, the main and important thing that stays with us all going forward is that we need to support Ukraine, trust the Ukrainian armed forces, and remember, I love you, Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.